Welcome to Friday Waters, an initiative of W4W Foundation. Friday Waters is also about bringing youth and different art sectors of water reasons. Sorry, I cut everything. Redo. Sorry. Warm greetings. Welcome to Friday Waters, an initiative of W4W Foundation. W4W Foundation is a think tank built as Citizens Collective. It is now 5 years old with over 450 sessions, and Friday Waters alone constitutes a third of it. Friday Waters is a continuation of signature series of W4W, namely Wednesdays.for.Water. This is Mansi Balbharwa from the House of W4W, and I am the host for the session today. The idea of Friday Waters is to bring water knowledge available in the various alternate forms at one place for developing a better understanding about water matters in different possible ways. The activities initiated in Friday Waters include Water Talkies, Water Reading Club, Water Arts, and Water Thesis Club, which is today. Each of these sessions takes place practically once a month, but depending on availability of the speakers. The Friday Water sessions are designed to be fun-filled and yet be fruitful to make the water conversations continue in different ways. Keep following us at w4w.in for regular updates. Today's Friday Water session is on Thesis Club, and we have Dr. Rahul Yaduka as a guest speaker to discuss his research on exploring people's resistance in fluvial ecologies. The focus of the Thesis Club is on bringing students, scholars who have done or are doing research on some aspects of the water set matters in this session in order to discuss with them their identified problem, aim, objectives, methodology, research design, field work, findings, and learning. In the process, we wish to learn more about making of the research and the contribution it aims to make in the science and society. The session is also meant to increase the outreach of the research and the research subject and the researcher. Before I invite Rahul for this session today, a deep gratitude for his acceptance to our invitation. And I would also like to give a brief biography before he makes his presentation. Dr. Rahul Yaduka is a postdoctoral researcher at SOAS, University of London, and works on the ERC UKRI funded WATCON project and is studying about water conflicts and river rights in South Asia. He holds a PhD in development studies, an MA in political science, and a BTech in civil engineering. Wow, what a spectrum of disciplines. His research explores politics of knowledge, community resistance, and disaster governance, focusing on issues concerning water security. Rahul is also an assistant editor of the LEAD journal. So welcome, Rahul. Thank you so much for agreeing. I'll just quickly place the rules of the game for the session today. You have 25 minutes to present, and that will be followed by another 25 to 30 minutes of question and answer based on your presentation. Thanks a lot for sharing the presentation in advance. So I am also well prepared, and I invite all the participants to look through the presentation and think about it and raise their questions and comments on Rahul's work and research. Over to you, Rahul.
Hi, thank you so much, Mansi, for finally setting this up. And of course, Ruchi is not here, but still thanks to her also that she insisted that I should speak at W4W in our last meeting. And thank you also to people present here. I have been talking about Kosi River and its floods for quite a long time, since even when my PhD was in progress. But this is one of the issues that was missing, that I did not put up for public scrutiny as yet. So I thought this will be a good chance where I talk about not the pitfalls of embankments, its socioeconomic implications, the ecological degradation that they bring about, but a political kind of aspect associated with the afterlife of embankment. That is, if there are so many problems, what are people doing vis-a-vis the embankment, vis-a-vis the state? What is their outlook? What is their engagement? What is their response towards these mega hydraulic structures that has a potential to alter their lives altogether, right? So very quickly, I'll take you through the background of this problem, but not focus much on that, because I particularly want to talk about people's resistance to it. So yeah, this is a very simple map of uh, River Kosi, and the blue lines appear like a bunch of lines coming from north to south, but they essentially present the meandering character of the River Kosi. That's something which needs to be put into perspective at the outset, that it's not a stable course that Kosi follows throughout its lifetime. So it used to follow on the eastern side of the map in 1731 or something. And right now it is on the western coast of this image. So right now it's flowing close to the Kosi region, as we call it in Bihar. So you can see the swing in the channel of the river. This tells a lot about its physical properties. So it's a transboundary river coming from Tibet, autonomous region of China, and then Nepal, and then India. It is a huge catchment area, and the point to be noted is that it flows through Yanfold Mountain, Himalayas. So that's important to tell, because that adds a lot of sediment, and siltation happens in the lower areas as the river descends into the plain from the mountainous areas of Nepal. So this is also a reason why this Kosi creates a fan kind of structure when it comes to the plain areas of Bihar. And this history of its taming of the river is also very long, starting from last decade of 19th century itself. But due to different factors coming together around the on the eve of independence of India, like electoral calculations, the need to do something about the Kosi problem, that Bhakra sentiment that was governing the human nature relationship at that time, the, the predicament of nation building, and how nation building was equated with the idea of development itself around 1950s. So these are various factors that sort of created a context in which finally the idea of creating embankments on the river Kosi could be fructified, although the debate was going for 100 years or so. And that at that time, a very crucial role was played by the technical expertise. Because if you go back into the history of how Kosi was embanked, you will see that justification that was put into the public by political leaders was that it is a technical decision taken by experts after visiting China and seeing the performance of embankment in that country. So there's also a story of how political was rendered technical through the use of scientific expertise around that time. Just a graphical representation. This is a typical settlement you will see on the bank of River Kosi. So you will see on the left there is a river, and you will also see there are some things which are submerged still in the river. So you can imagine that it's an erosion that is happening, and the river is sort of pushing to the right. And you can see huts, you can see boats, you can see concrete pillars, you can also see some bags. So they are basically anti-erosion structures. So to protect the uh, households situated on the bank of the river, these are done by Water Resource Department. We'll talk about it later. So we'll not believe that this is the river bed actually. You will see a huge amount of sediment inside the riverbed. And that's what I was trying to say when I said it's a river that flows from the Yangtze mountain of Himalayas. And that's why it carries a lot of silt along with it. So obviously, even if it's not allowed, there is a lot of excavation that is happening close to embankment in the riverbed in the Supal district of Bihar. This is the photograph taken from that place. So I'll skip this. Yeah, so structural interventions have come up on the river. And you see that the initial width of the river was around 20 kilometers, but subsequently, due to embankments, it was between 16 to 4 kilometers in different sections of the river. And there are also certain stretches. For instance, you have this Kosi Mahasetu that connects eastern parts of River Kosi to western parts. At that, below that bridge, you will see the river being compressed to 2 kilometers of width. Like we see in the case of Chicken Neck Corridor in Siliguri, you will see that river is coming, then it is compressed using guide embankments, mammoth-like structures of concrete, very strong structures, and then the river is released again on the downstream. So this is how river has been treated in different ways in different sections. So what has happened because of it is the land erosion inside has intensified. You can simply imagine that if river is compressed, there is less space available for it to spread its silt and water. And on the outer side, you will see that the paleo channels of River Kosi or the monsoon rains don't have a entry into the river main channel anymore because you have an embankment in the between the two. So water logging is happening on the outer side. So for a very long stretch on either side of the embankment, you will see water logging, and it is perennial because river is not finding monsoon rain is not finding a way to spread its water and drainage is obstructed. Because of that, agriculture, but to a certain width outside the embankment is also prohibited. And very recently, although the academic debate on larger scale is happening for quite some time regarding climate change, on ground, even if people are not able to frame that in the language of climate change, but as a researcher, we can see that things which are happening, they are not able to situate that in the long history of their traditional knowledge. They are just saying that this used not to happen earlier. These are certain things which are not able to understand in terms of why the river is behaving in this way, or why do we have sudden rains in the month of October after Durga Puja, which is uh, catching them hands off. So they have paddy which is harvested, bundled in the field because that's not planned. That river will come with flood in the month of October in the late weeks. But it happened in 2021 when I was in the field. And this was the condition of padding in that year. This is a classical photo that I think I've taken. You can see after multiple steps of, we call it Dauni in case of North Bihar. So this is the process through which the husk of wheat is separated from the grains. So you'll see that after multiple steps of that, even now you will see mud deposition on the paddy. So it's of no use in the market and nobody can consume it either. So in this case, people were saying, farmers were saying that we are not ready for this kind of flood because our oral knowledge or our traditional knowledge has told us that Kosi will not flood after Durga Puja. So if it is doing, we have to calibrate our knowledge again. So because of this water logging, you have more intense flood and erosion. You have this kind of random behavior of river and sedimentation is happening on the floods, on the crops. You see a seasonal circular migration, which of course is a distress kind of response. It's a maladaptation to the changing character of river and associated agriculture. So agriculture is there, but it's very unsure, right? Kharif is not there, Rabi crops is there. That depends on provision of a lot of capital intensive irrigation also. So you'll see uncertainty is there, unsure agriculture is there, no extra agricultural income is there. So nothing is there beyond agriculture. So in that case, you have to find a plug that makes life go ahead. So in that case, what is happening is seasonal circular migration going to different kind of places like agricultural fields or urban industrial complex. The diversity of migrant destination is continuously increasing. But yeah, very quickly coming to the thing that I just wanted to discuss a bit is, so when you start engaging into this, this was the backdrop. This is happening in case of Kosi. So what you see, uh, political ecology says as a discipline that human nature relationship is political. The way we engage with nature is not apolitical. It's not just technical intervention. And and building on that, we have a different kind of lens through which we also look at disasters, right? And when we study social movements also, there is a continuous evolution of how we are trying to understand that process. Once these problems have been discussed, we can only imagine that it's natural that people will be doing something. If they are not doing something, that also has to be explained. So the brief scope of literature says that the social movement studies conventionally says or imagines resistance as something organized, which has a leadership and which has a spectacular kind of display of resistance. But later on, we have this uh, interruption by James C. Scott, who says, no, it's not necessary. We have to see how weaks use their weapon in his book, Weapons of the Weak, as in those people who don't have power, who don't have capacity, who don't have organizational strength. How do they resist? Then he comes up with his idea of everyday resistance. But even that was not convincing to me in the case of Kosi. And then I stumbled upon this framework of resistance studies, which says that in between this everyday resistance and massive, large scale, stepwise mobilization of people, you can have a range of tactics people use. And there is no particular doctrine that they follow. There's no blueprint of the resistance. And then comes the idea of assemblage of tactics. This term I borrowed from Alf Gunvald Nielsen, who worked on river and the rage in case of Narmada. And he tries to understand how social movement in case of Narmada can be understood. And one more thing that was apparent to me as I progressed in my fieldwork is that when we study the literature of social movement, there is no mention of biophysical backdrop. We talk about society. We talk about the movements as a sociological or cultural phenomenon. But I got a leaf that I could build upon in the book of Ramachandra Guha, Unquiet Woods. He talks about sociological landscape of resistance, ecological landscape of resistance, that you have to factor in the backdrop, the geographical backdrop in which people are trying to mobilize themselves. So in that case, you see, that's where you can go back to now the title of the talk, people's resistance in fluvial ecologies. I'm not just trying to talk about how people resist any development project in general, but I'm trying to see how people imagine and practice resistance in a certain kind of geography. And fluvial ecology, as in very briefly, as I have used the term wet theory by Kuntala Lahirudar, it says that it's a fluvial landscape. You have this land this year, but then flood will come, it will be submerged, or you have water at certain place, it will be sedimented and made solid. In the charred lands of Assam also, there is a liminal kind of condition in which land exists. Today it's land, tomorrow it's water. So in that kind of fluid and fluvial landscape, how do people get a sense of stability, articulate their interests, or are their interests themselves very fluid? So these are the things I try to probe in my thesis. So one thing that I could figure out from my fieldwork is that location of a people. When I say a people, it means a group of people having similar kind of interest. So you see, on the outer side of the embankment, that is the countryside as we call it, engineers call it, and on the river side of the embankment, the people have diametrically opposite interest, right? So, or think in a reversed way, any embankment, if proposed, has a possibility to divide people into pro-embankment and anti-embankment. Similarly, if you come up with a bridge, on the upstream, you will have some villages which will be eroded more because the bridge and its structures, the pillars and guide dams, etc., will be pushing the water upwards on the upstream. So there are locations near Kosi Mahasetu also, where I went and tried to talk to people and how they have lost their land, how land erosion has been intensified in last decade since Kosi Mahasetu came up. So the point I'm trying to make from this is that we cannot talk about a Kosi problem in general. We can't talk about Kosi people in general. We have to talk about pockets of people having different kind of interests at one point of time. For instance, to achieve this, I tried to look at four structures written in the fourth bullet point of this slide, that is Kosi Mahasetu, Guide 1, SMLV, that is Sikharata Majari Lower Embankment, and then Bakor Bheja Bridge. Around these four structural interventions, I tried to see how people's interests are articulated. Are all the people in that locality having similar grievances or interests within the structure? So my answer was that no, it's not there. There is an internal division within the community, and the interests of the community are heterogeneous. So yeah, when you talk to people, when you talk to engineers, when you talk to political leaders and environmentalists, they have different kind of opinion on different structures. So you have to look that in situ. You can't pass a very general kind of remark that embankments, people oppose embankments. I think this was the entry point with which I entered into the field. But gradually I found a lot of people today also they are struggling. When we see there is a people's movement, we by default go by the assumption that people are resisting the embankment. Somewhere or the other, it's there in a mind. I can list at least 5, 6 organizations now in Kosi which are demanding for stretches of embankment to protect their villages, right? So now we are in a situation in which interest of river are on the one side and livelihood of people is on the other side. So it's the debate is not that simple. But in that capacity, who is affected by the embankments and disaster management approach of the state? So they have different kind. As I mentioned, assemblage of tactics is there. So the people are also resisting state's knowledge. It's not simply accepting. It's a epistemic contestation also that is happening. For instance, there is a flood calendar from 15th May to 15th October, and it is a designated flood period. It's not simple. It has a very large implications. Why? Because if there is a flood before 15th May or after 15th October and people have damages, they cannot claim anything because it is beyond the flood period and the state has no liability to compensate for the damages of people. So this basic decision of what constitutes flood, what constitutes flood calendar, and what is the flood period has a long-term implication on people. So in the context of climate change and people's experience of how they are witnessing the vulnerability of floods, it has to be attuned, as in there cannot be a fixed dates on which flood is identified and on other dates it is not identified. Right now, this is happening. Now, this is anti-erosion work. So this is decided by technical bodies like COSI High Level Committee by the inputs of executive engineers from the ground and assistant engineers. There is a hierarchy of people. Now they decide on this particular location, embankment is threatened, it's vulnerable. So you have to do this kind of work. So there is a multiple things you can see here. You can see porcupine structures, you can see jute bags, you can see sandbags also. So multiple things are there to just save the embankment, right? Now, there is also a problem in this. Why? There is an angle of corruption that is involved. There's a long history in which contractors use, let's say, 100 sacks of soil or sand to, to protect the embankment, but they will make the invoice of 500 bags. And the classical explanation is that we put 500 bags, but 400 are washed away by Kosi. So there is no accountability. Technically, you can fix on them. So what people say is that they also have a take on this. That's their way of articulating their knowledge, is that deliberately the contractors wait for the moment Kosi is rising and then they start the anti-erosion work. However, public money would have been saved if they can start this work in the month of December or January, because river is drier at that time. It will take lesser public money, more accountability can be fixed, but this is not happening again. One very crucial thing that I thought is important to see is that the state's language is that these are Kosi Pidit people. In media, in leaders' speeches, in policy documents, you will see Kosi Pidit as a common terminology that used for the people. But the people who are slightly mobilized by certain organized people's resistance, I talk about that in my thesis also. Kosi Narirnar Manch was one of the organizations affiliated with NAPM also, that sensitized people started reclaiming their subject identity and converted people into a resistant subject by saying that no, we are not Kosi Pirit, we are Kosi Tatbandh Pirit. We are not victims of Kosi River because Kosi is not a problem as such, as the state says, but we are the victims of Kosi embankments. So that's an important tool of politicization using the language, fixing the correct location of the problem, identifying the right source of the problem in the official policies that these people are trying to reclaim. I mean, this is how I try to see that this is also the assertion of their identity. Also, people are trying to produce their own knowledge, because when you go to that region, very young children, 7, 8 years of girls and boys can row boats. They know the river, how to walk in the river with a lot of uh, material on their head, grass or something else. And this knowledge is being transmitted through oral tradition. There is no written textbook that they are handed over. They live with the river. And in this process of living with the river, they have a know-how or hands-on experience of how to deal with the floods, how to deal with the river, how to know where to swim, where not to go, what are the precautions to be taken. So many things are there. Yeah. So if we just try to organize this puzzle of different ways in which people are trying to resist the state, is it can start from articulating their grievances in terms of stories, in terms of myths, in terms of folks or folk songs also. So I used to gather them in the field. While I was there in the field, I used to request people to tell about Kosi. Then they used to sing songs. And in that song, you can also sense the nostalgia, the good life they used to have, the problems they used to have, and how Kosi embankment has pushed them on the margins of survival, and how their uh, imagination of life is there, that there used to be bumper crops, not only two, multiple, three, four crops, different kind of rice, different kind of mangoes. So all these things come in their transmission of this knowledge through folk songs. An important observation was also that people through this entire process have put the moral burden on the state, that they have moral high ground, people have moral high ground, and in that capacity, if their homes are eroded, they will squat on the public land. They will occupy the spurs and embankments. They will refuse to pay lagan on time and cess to the block development officer. There have been episodes of organized poll boycotts also. So I think in that way, people are trying to assert on the state that, see, it is because of your policies that we have been victimized. So you cannot apply that kind of legal framework on us when we breach the law. So this is happening in case of many things, as I listed, in case of revenue collection or encroachment. So this is a protest dharna sit-in happening in the front of Supol Collectorate Office, organized by Kosi Namdin Manmanch. You will see good enough representation of women in that case, because in case of Kosi, as we see, as I mentioned, migration is there. So the first respondent to disaster happened to be women. And most of the responsibility of household, taking care of the belongings, taking care of the field, everything falls on the women. So they have this much more intimate, direct, and personal experience of how flood affects their life. So that's how I used to see that there is a lot of turnout of women in such kind of resistance activities. So Kosi Namriman Manch, just 2 minutes I'll take. It is trying to, again, using multiple, it's a multifaceted kind of approach it is deploying. So first of all, it is trying to force accountability on the state. That these are the SOP that you have, standard operating procedure, according to disaster management department, that people who have been wronged by your policies have to be ensured this minimum things. Like you have this Rahat Shivir, you have this dry ration that has to be given to people, medical camps have to be there, educational facilities have to be there. So pushing the state to provide all this to people is one thing that is continuously going on. Strategies are also very crucial. You have this mass mobilization, extra constitutional struggles on the street, and then you also have this engagement with judiciary through PIL. You have this exchange of memorandum, letters to different departments of the government. You have also this occasional organizations of Kosi People's Commission. I happen to be the member secretary of that organization, and we had a lot of people like Medha Patkar, Ajay Dikshit, Rajiv Sinha of IIT Kanpur, who were the member of that, Ravi Chopra, member of that commission. And we came out with a report, which we claim that it's people's commission and people's knowledge is being put against the state's official knowledge. So these things were going on, and then you have this Padyatra from Supol to Patna, 13 days of Padyatra with 100 people, 50 of them were women. So you see different strategies are being adopted depending on which works or which does not work. It's not that it has confined itself only to dharnas or only knowledge production or only legal struggles. Different kind of activities are being undertaken. So at a theoretical level, I looked at it like production of counter expertise. I mean, through workshops, conferences, documenting the aftermath of floods in Kosi, engagement with people, scientists, engagement with activist scholar. So all of them used to go to the field, listen to the people, articulate their problems in people's language, and it came together as a production of counter expertise. As in, this can be put against what state is trying to say and explain the problem of the flood in Kosi River. And then, of course, there are some welfare activities also it is undertaking, like immunization of children, relief camps being run on uh, crowdfunding, or mobilizing some institutional support domestically and abroad to facilitate emergency support to the people, in which there is a lag between floods and the state's response. So these are different kind of things which are going on. And at the end of all this, we see state also is not a monolith. It is a genus-based identity. It is producing the vulnerability through its policies and then taking care of people like a welfare state, right? Care is becoming a control mechanism in that case. You also see that it's it's not only coercive, it's productive also. And similarly, since state is both coercive and productive, you have this resistance movements also, which are not only opposing the state, but it's also engaging with the state. Community is also engaging with the state as and when required. So I think this is the complex puzzle that we are having in this context right now. And one thing that I can simply conclude here is that it's not easy to draw easy conclusions from the Kosi River story. Thank you. I can't hear you. You're mute.
Oh, sorry. Thank you so much, Rahul, for this insightful presentation and very sorted out and your understanding of the flora and ecosystem as well as people's resistance. And what you presented as people's resistance, I have been saying it for a long time as Jal Satyagraha in a different way. And very rightly put that they have different forms, different shapes. So what I will do before opening the discussion round, I'll quickly do a summary of whatever little I have understood from your presentation. And then also it gives time for all the participants to think about questions and comments. And I will start with some questions from my end. I mean, first thing very striking in your presentation, and which I strongly believe, is the way these large government-induced projects, which is also kind of vulnerabilities, and then government taking an upper hand of talking about it as a caregiver or of the system or welfare state. I'm using simple words, not very scientific words, as your presentation. That's the whole idea of Friday Waters. And something which has always intrigued me is the way politicizing of science takes place and the scientization of politics which happens, which was your early presentation part. And of course, you did talk about the whole physical or physiography of Koshi, telling us about how meandering it is and the shifting land and shifting water, which makes probably things more complicated. On there, something also came further from your analytical frameworks, which for me was quite interesting to see how you bring together the environmental determinism or the political ecology and putting it together with the cultural politics of the way we look at the river, the way we narrate the vulnerability, and the way people look at it and the way people come together for resistance. And very rightly put, the resistance is not always necessarily for the river, it may be for them. And you gave a good example of that a set of people resisting for protection of the embankment, and the other side, people resisting for other reasons, and so on. And I think an important learning comes also from the way you talk about how resistance is not by the place or by the people per se, but there's also time factor. So you talk about place specific and time specific resistance, which makes a difference. And a nuance of how resistance is kind of a tool or a weapon of the weak. And is manifested in everyday life for that matter. And the fact that people have resisted for different reasons, that also gives a very good landscape of the issues that the Kosi River intervention brings forth. So it's not the river, which was very striking line actually, that it's not the river induced vulnerability, but it is the policy or the project induced vulnerability which makes into account of resistance. I think something which is kind of normalized in the country, you also bring forth it very nicely as an aspect of resistance by people, is the way corruption is involved in these mega structures or mega projects, which kind of has become like an endless game. And especially, I think I'm adding from my end, because these mega structure funding comes from, debts or loans from international companies, it kind of becomes like, they are the doers or the corrupt practices have become kind of sanitized from people's reach. And that also brings the point, you put it very nicely, that the language between the state and the language of the people, where people are making it very clear, and where state is talking about the Kosi's problem, and we see it in everyday language as well, that flood and drought is God given. And when government goes and supports people, it's like the government is doing a favor. It's a very much top-down approach of looking at it. I was really happy to see that you talked about women at the forefront of resistance, and it reminds me of my recent article on listing a kind of a roast of resistance across the country. And just 2 days ago, the Chita Satyagraha is back again on the, on the riverbed of Ken Betwa. And I think these things bring very detailed nuance of the way you present in one river. But as I said in the beginning of my summarizing, that it's a story of almost every river. We have seen how well documented the Narmada Bachao Andolan is, and probably there are not many of these resistance which are very well documented. In fact, I have only learned about this documentation when I came across work of people like Ruchi, Philip, you. Otherwise, I wasn't also aware. The moment we talk about Jal Satyagraha, Narmada, of course, comes at the forefront, because we have not seen many such resistance on Ganga, which is something I still feel that people are a bit intimidated to not really rise on the kind of atrocities the Ganga implementation or intervention is bringing forth. So thank you so much for enlightening about Koshi. It is definitely a big learning for me today. And I would like to start asking the very essence of people's resistance when you put it very nicely, where state simultaneously acts as an agent of protection and also the producer of vulnerability. And it's a kind of a sequence is other way around. So it produces vulnerability and then it acts as a caregiver. What do you think about state power in this sense? I mean, I smell top-down water management, which was unlike the traditional way of water management. What is your take on it?
Can you frame that question again? Sorry.
Yeah, so you were talking about state being the producer of vulnerability as well as the agent of protection. Where do you see this power relationship between the state and the people? I'm just putting it in a different way, to be honest.
Okay. So yeah, I wrote a paper. Maybe I should have shared that already with you or put some link for Calcutta Research Group that's based in Kolkata under Ranavir Samandar. So there I talked about this care as a tool of governmentality. As in,
Yes.
I tried to locate, it's always care. The language used for intervention, the language used for coercion, the language used for disciplining, the language used for welfare. Every time state has this language of care only. Because the inception of this policy comes in 1953 floods. And the language is that Prime Minister Nehru at that time thought, we have to care for the people of Kosi. We can't leave this situation like this. Something needs to be done. I mean, this was his instruction. So again, you see the maternal state entering with a vantage point of care. Then whenever uh, the whole thing came that people are having a lot of problem with this river. So we need to care for them.
Mm.
We cannot ignore them. Similarly, when there is a flood, the state provides all these things. So it again comes in the language of care. So you see, it comes with a language of care, but all the time we see that it engages with people to push a similar agenda, or that is of development in certain kind. It continuously constrains the river to come up with more and more structures. For instance, let's say today also a bridge is coming, that is Bakor Bheja Bridge, Asia's longest bridge is coming.
Mm.
More bridges are in the pipeline. It will always say that it will help Kosi people. You see, second inter-river linking is happening here is Kosi only. You have this Kosi-Mechi linking which is happening. Mechi is a tributary of Mahananda. So again, there also, I and some people from social activist group, we went to the field, cracked this open, studied the DPR, and then did a press conference in Bihar and wrote articles at multiple places that this has nothing to do with flood control. But in the budget speech also, and it was suddenly exploded everywhere in media in Bihar, that Kosi Mechi interlinking project will obliterate the problem Kosi floods. But hardly 5,000 cusecs of water will be reduced. You know the amount of water comes when it is flooding? 3.5 lakh cusecs. Last year it was
Where is the
6.6 lakh
match?
cusecs. Where is the match? Exactly. So that's what we try to do. So whatever it does, it has its own agenda, but primarily we see that there is a language of care deployed. It will never say that
Mm.
we'll ignore these people. But when you talk to these engineers in person, they have categorically said to me, at least, that we need to understand that we are responsible for structures and people outside. If somebody is living inside, it is their problem. We can't do anything
Mm.
about it. So, from Ganga Flood Control Commission to Rajaswa Karamchari, the entire hierarchy I've talked about, they said river bed is a wrong place to live. If somebody goes and जैसे वो हिंदी में कहते हैं अब नदी के पेट में जाके कोई बैठ जाएगा तो हम क्या करेंगे.
Mm.
But how that space has been made vulnerable because it was their village. You have confined the river. It's not, again, coming back to initial
Mm.
discussion. Kosi has never
Mm.
had a permanent channel of its own. So, how
Mm.
do you define which is river's place and which is not?
Not.
So, this is very arbitrary in that sense. You produce the risk and vulnerability and allocate it to some people at cost of some other people. So, I digressed a bit, but I think, yeah, power in
Yeah,
this sense
but
is
that's the
generally,
power game. That is also the
yeah.
power game we see in most of the water, infrastructure projects and all. And also, I think this is where we need to also look at how the government is privileging, and which I use the word scientization of politics or politicization of science, how government actually privileges this technical expertise over the local traditional knowledge and their concern. And again, government is having this upper hand of claiming to be visioning something for the longer run in terms of economy, in terms of the welfare state, and so on and so forth. And in the process, it is not actually self evaluating as what is gained and what is lost. What I miss in most of the large water infrastructure projects is the missing assessment, and I will say regular assessment over the time, as what did the society earn out of these mega structures and what did it lose. And I mean, we have already lost the environmental impact assessment, which is anyway, filtered in different ways, but it is no more even useful. But then we do not have any assessment tools, strategic environmental assessment, which is happening across the world. And it is not happening, and it is also not coming forward in the public domain, and government itself is also not learning to learn from it and execute it in alternate ways. So you talked about in terms of people's resistance that an alternate knowledge production also takes place, and that is very rooted or grounded with the local issues, time based, space based, and some intervention based, and so on and so forth. How do you really look at the forms of this knowledge as a means for complementarity, or for, as a contestation in terms of what government imposes on us? I mean, we have on paper participatory water management and planning, but if it is not taking into account people's perceptions and preferences, how do you think they get incorporated? What is what the alternate knowledge is producing? Is it going somewhere? Where is it going in Koshi?
I deployed some attention to this question because I was really perplexed what engineers are thinking about that. The
Hmm.
point is that it's very convoluted kind of understanding that developed ultimately. First of
Hmm.
all, there is no institutional way in which people's knowledge can have an intercourse with technical knowledge.
Hmm.
And in a democracy, how do
Yeah.
people erase their issues through their representatives, right?
Yes.
But that's the unfortunate reality. Not only, and it's to be noted that not only lay people or community is bypassed, but the people's representative are also bypassed. The sole authority on policy making is
Hmm.
with the Water Resource Department. Even
Yes.
disaster management department is not going to have any intersection with them. So how
Yes.
ironical is that
Hmm.
DMD, Disaster Management Department, is compensating for the disasters created by Water Resource Department.
Absolutely. Very well put.
So
And it is this is the fragmentation we have in not only disciplines but across the sectors between the ministries.
exactly. So I listen to the people that, as I mentioned in the slide also, they have an opinion. For instance, with respect to when anti-erosion work should be done and where it should be done,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So you have two phases: anti-erosion work before floods come, and flood
Yes.
fighting work after floods come. So
Hmm.
people are clearly looking at that and saying
Hmm.
deliberately some sites are left vulnerable
Hmm.
so that the work can be undertaken during the flood period. Why?
Hmm.
Why this preference? Because flood fighting work के लिए टेंडर नहीं किया जाता है.
Hmm.
Competitive tender does not happen to
Hmm.
flood fighting work because it is emergency work. So in that
Emergency.
process, engineers can allocate the work to the favorite contractors.
Hmm.
And
It's a
then you
modus
understand how
operandi
the,
now. Yeah, it is a modus
yes,
operandi now. Hmm.
yes. So this is happening there, and people are having this frustration key. For instance, if you look at the entire policy making chain, that there
Hmm.
is flood, then the floods dies out, then
Hmm.
OC high level committee comes, engineers are ready in their stretches with their inputs, and COSI High Level Committee in 3 days visits entire COSI Eastern and Western embankment. Then
Hmm.
it goes, vets that suggestions. Where is the community? At no point in this whole process they have
Hmm.
any
It's an
intersection with
expert.
elected.
Expert.
Yeah, just engineers, executive engineers, and they will simply talk to them, and a kind of deja vu is happening. If you look at these KHLC recommendations, you will have
Hmm.
this deja vu effect that similar kind of work is happening every year. And there is no one to question that why it is required every year. Can't you put
The
that money in
routine job
something
then.
else? Yes, yes. So this is
Hmm.
that's what I sort of try to articulate it as. uh,
Hmm.
it's not a disaster anymore, because if you look at classical definition of disaster, there is an element of shock, surprise, and
Hmm. Yes.
non-routine thing.
Hmm.
But Kosi case is ironical in the sense there is a routinization of disaster management.
Yes.
So if
I mean,
something is so routine,
yeah.
how come it is an accident?
You remind me of Apada Mein Avsar narrative. I mean, and it is true to all infrastructure projects that on one hand, we do not have enough fund allocated for maintenance. On the other hand, uh, the maintenance or the breakage is seen as a now an normalized modus operandi that we have to continuously keep doing because there is money, there is something to keep working on. And it is also then becomes kind of a loophole to consume a lot of corruption in the process. And the fact that community is unheard is also part of the corrupt practice if they are not in the process. That brings me to a question that when you presented that recognizing communities are internally diverse and with conflicting interests, they have unequal power, different relationships, and it changes with the state and the way we think about community participation and representation, and especially when they have diverging reasons to resist. Where do you think then communities are trying to find a convergence, or is it not required because they are space and place and time and reason specific resistance? Do you think that we really need a situation where all the communities are in a chorus of one issue, or you think it is really not required because the situations are different?
See, I think there is something unique with this structure of embankment itself. It's a linear project,
Mm.
you know.
Yeah.
So it divides people into pro-embankment and anti-embankment because it creates, as I said in my thesis, it creates its own
That's like a
constituency.
government strategy also in a way, probably
Yes,
unintended
yes,
intended in
yes,
the beginning, but normalized over time.
yes. So I'll give you an example of how it is intended input. Uh, Set a sitting MLA of Supal,
Hmm.
Vidhan Sabha constituency is running is there for 5, 6 terms, I think now. So he said to have said to the people that I don't need vote of 10,000 people who live inside Kosi. By creating
Hmm.
this SMLB, that is Sikhalatta Majhari Low Embankment, that came after the main embankment of 1954, I have
Hmm.
consolidated my supporters.
Okay, very clear.
So it's very clear. So the point is that it has a larger ramification for democratic theory itself. It
Hmm.
means arithmetic democracy में इसका solution नहीं.
Yes.
Because if the leader is so clear and so blatant and gross
Hmm.
in saying that I don't need vote of 10,000 people, it means does not have a potential. So I write in popular media also that existing framework of democracy, is it suitable, is it capable, or potential है इसके पास to solve the Kosi injustice, or do we need to anchor not democracy but justice as a
Hmm.
concept?
But it also questions
Because
the way welfare state will be looked at. If it is, people based or number based, then in principle, the very idea of welfare itself, state itself fails because it has a larger meaning to it. Because if a leader wins by a certain number, the leader is not necessarily leading and providing facilities to only those people who voted. It's for everybody. So then it
exactly.
completely fails the very purpose. I mean, and this is a very interesting discussion altogether as well. I mean, how democracy, and I think all these, when we talk about water resistance and satyagrahas, it is an integral part of understanding the constitution, the democratic process altogether. In fact, water becomes a very good subject to study democracy. I mean, I wish we have very focused education on water and democracy in this sense. Very interesting subject for that matter. That brings me to another question on, is resistance always oppositional? And you also placed it very nicely, laid it out how, or it can also involve negotiation, strategic engagement, and even selective cooperation. And again, it will be placed in time and reason based. Where should we draw line between resistance and accommodation? And if I may add, submission, because the first idea of imposing large water infrastructure is kind of an imposition, which people having no clarity and lack of information in a way submit to the idea, also with the aspiration that it is for their well-being. Dams are classic examples that people who lived around the dam in the beginning, they thought it is for them. It is much later they realized. And also all the assessment tells that The people who or live next to the dam are the most water hit people. So it took them time to understand that something which is being made on their ancestral rights and land and water is actually not for them. So it is a sheer imposition as well. So what is this leverage of accommodation or resistance or submission you understand from your side?
See, you connected to this question is what I could not answer in the last one, that where is the convergence possible?
Yes,
So
I think now
I
it's
think
coming here. Yeah.
so convergence is possible in only around one common denominator is
Hmm.
is the survival of the people and their livelihood. I
Hmm.
think that is a
Yes.
single question that is common to all the people. Why I'm saying
Hmm.
this? I simply quote one line and you can understand the ramifications and how people are alienated with the river. On
Hmm.
22nd of January 2025, I was in
Hmm.
Kosi. It was very cold and we had a sabha kind of thing. 100 odd people were there.
Hmm.
And we were just trying to get a sense of how did October 2024 flood had this impact on community and how they are sort of trying to come out of it. So a lady in
Hmm.
her, I think 35 around age said either state या तो सरकार अपनी नदी को कहीं और ले जाए
Hmm.
या हम लोगों को नदी से बाहर कर दे.
Hmm.
So the idea is that now then I'm thinking about Amitabh Aviskar's approach of
Hmm.
environmentalism. As in,
Hmm.
then we have to think this environmentality itself is an imposition on the common people then.
Absolutely. I mean, I
Be-
have no two doubts on this, and I can
Because
really sign up
because
for it.
because because if you look, I try to divide my respondent into age brackets also.
Hmm.
So if you
Hmm.
talk to a 20-year-old guy and an
Hmm.
80-year-old guy, they have different ideas of river. They have different
Absolutely.
sentiments for the river.
Hmm.
So what I'm trying to take you towards is there is a discourse, and I'm sorry it can happen. It will be a tragedy that Kosi will be converted into a canal, and
And it will
it's
not be surprising the way
it
things
will
are
not be
going on in the
surprising.
country.
What people are trying to say. See, I mentioned in the slide that there are locations below the bridge
Hmm.
where Kosi is confined in
Hmm.
2 kilometers.
Hmm.
So from Nepal on the Birpur barrage, you have this 2 kilometers. On Kosi Mahasetu, you have very small width. In Balwaha Pul. So along the length of the Kosi, there are 4 or 5 locations where Kosi is flowing in 2 kilometers. So people are saying that this can be done in the entire stretch of the Kosi itself, from Birpur barrage to Kursela where it meets Kanda. So this is what happens when people
Hmm.
are pushed to the brink. That you
Hmm.
अब उनको बस यही लगता है कि there is nothing like living with the river, managing with the river,
Hmm.
engaging with the problems, living with the dance of the river, nothing like that. All of them are of the firm belief, as if my expanse of the field was huge. It was
Hmm.
not a, it was multi-sided photography to say.
Hmm.
So most of them are trying to say that, and people are saying, सरकार हमारी जमीन ले ले, कैनाल बना दे कोसी को, हमें बस एक कट्ठा जमीन बाहर दे दे. They are anchoring only into agriculture on a stable land. उनको और कुछ नहीं चाहिए
Hmm.
स्टेट से. So it means that this is the common thing that is happening, where
Hmm.
everybody is united to come out of the river. Nobody wants to live
Hmm.
inside the river now.
Mm. And knowing that government will continue doing things, you remind me again of the 40 years of, Medha Patkar's life. And it's all about fair compensation and the whole discourse and scholarship, which is very well laid out on environmental justice, and it really hurts to large extent to the way at this moment the country is the citizens of the country are resisting on different issues of water, and if we had not heard Narmada in that time, and if it is suppressed that time, and continues the resistance, it also on one hand it gives a hope of democracy being alive, So I'm just trying to become optimistic as we come closer towards the end. And this is also a time I would like the participants to please unmute themselves and engage. if you have anything interesting or something to ask or comment to Rahul. So for me, resistance is a symbol of a life democracy. I will be very honest on that. Having said that, it's also important for scholars like us that we learn how, how resistance shapes policies. In other words, we can say that how, community shapes the practices. In other words, we can also say how these practices shapes community. As you said, people are just now willing to get the bare minimum rightful compensation. You also remind me of the Chita Satyagraha sisters who are sitting to ask for right compensation they deserve. The whole Hasdev protest on Hasdev forest is also on their fair compensation rights. So I mean, I'm just thinking as my closing question on how state interventions are reshaping communities, and in turn, community resistance are reshaping state. And is the state really getting immunized by not responding to the resistance? And where do you see we are heading in this relationship between state and societies, given the fact that much of these larger projects can be seen from the capitalistic lens as well, because it is about some people benefiting in leaps and bounds, and many people are losing bit by bit. So, can governance be understood as this continuous process of transformation, or do you still see that we are making it stronger and stronger every day as a one-way control which is top down? What's your take on this? And this is my last question, and maybe we invite Anup to pose this question as well after you respond.
So I think community is, see, state is not using force in that way. And this will be a matter of different presentation altogether if I start responding to this particular question. Because there is in one chapter of my thesis, I also see what is the situation in which this policy inertia is there. Why this policy is not changing despite so much of criticism and people's resistance. So there is a very material context that perpetuates the continuation of this policy. Because to give one example, these people are not electorally significant for anyone because
That makes
they
it
are not
unheard.
they are
They are
not
unheard.
they are not in one Vidhan Sabha constituency or one Lok Sabha constituency. The Kosi flows through at least 5 districts of Bihar, multiple, more than dozens of Vidhan Sabha constituencies. And as that political leader said, everybody can ignore Kosi without any problem.
It's no
Second,
one's baby then, because
it's no
the
one's
leaders
baby.
are
Yeah.
unaffected.
And then you have this geographical challenge itself. They are very impoverished people. To mobilize people on a large scale in that kind of fluvial ecology is very difficult. I have been part of that people's movement. I have myself got on the boats, traveled for miles on feet in the mud to reach out to the hamlets. It's not your conventional Premchand kind of village in which there is a tola of people. You have one person's home here. You walk for 10 minutes, you will find another home. So in that situation, you try to imagine how do you gather 100 people? And if
Yes.
you call those people for district collectorate के सामने उन्हें धरना देना है, just imagine the kind of work they need to do. They have to walk for miles and miles. They have to cross couple of streams of river on the boat. And then they have to reach on the embankment. Then they have to use some means of transportation to reach the district headquarters. And it's never possible to return their home in the same day. Do you really
And
think?
yeah, and lose that day's livelihood, because many of these people are living by every day.
Precisely. So state, I think it is thinking that as in the full film also they पहले वो चिल्लाएंगे फिर वो थक जाएंगे फिर वो चुप हो जाएंगे. So I think this is the classical case in of Kosi, because if I write about migration of Kosi, they just keep floating. They are not earning through migration. They are just surviving. Through migration, they are not dying. You will see rampant commentary of this kind that if there had not been migration in Delhi, Punjab, people would have died. because
Yeah.
agriculture is not dependable. So I think a state has understood that they can never be a challenge. So as I read some of the rights in a very old essay, permitted, ignored, and different forbidden kinds of resistance. So state also knows what kind of resistance practices have to be forbidden, what had to be just ignored, and what has to be allowed. So you have to allow people. For instance, as I say, people are allowed to squat on the public land because the state knows we will remove them whenever we will.
Tomorrow they will be either removed by force or by the river itself.
Yeah. So the state just wants this to continue. It has no affinity with the river. I'm sorry to say that also community does not have any affinity with the river. The river is no one's business now. It has become really a problem, which it was not previously. And the whole question is survival right now. So that's the whole thing that is happening.
Yeah, I mean, still keeping it optimistic, you also, motivate me to start thinking about the way the Nehruvian idea of nation building, a lot of altruism that got into it when we got independence. It is also something continues as a nation building narrative, but we cannot build nation on the I should not use a wrong word here, but on people's fires or people's storms. That's extremely dangerous in any democracy. And we can continue talking about it for that matter, and it requires much deeper understanding and discussion. But let me just invite Anu. Thank you so much, Rahul, for patiently responding to these queries. I can continue talking to you endlessly, to be honest, but let's get Anup and we'll close after that. Anu.
Thank you, Rahul Yaduka, for excellent presentation, I must say. But I have a one questions led by a comment. When we are talking about resistance, we can see the most notable is the paucity of a space given to the questions of collective resistance, and with reference to ecological activism. If you look at particularly in South Asia, so for example, when you're talking about, for example, feelings, while feelings likely refer to embodied experience, you can say emotional responses or sensory engagements with the environment, people perceive non-violence as a site of resistance. For example, you can see emotions and affective practices are there. You can say belonging, we can see attachment, even care, loss. This all are play a very significant role in shaping non-violent as a forms of resistance. When you're talking, whenever the term resistance comes to our mind, we are thinking it's very violent forms of resistance, but we can see non-violent as a form of resistance. So, and also it is a part of ecological activism and a struggle, for recognition. So if I ask you, have you seen non-violence as a site of resistance in your work or in your work through the field that you are working on? Yeah.
No, no. Frankly speaking, thank you so much for this a very different kind of comment. Uh, Non-violence as a site of resistance, definitely I'm not using the analytical category to engage into that. But I think when we talk about everyday resistance, we automatically start with this vantage point that these are not strong enough people to mobilize organized violence to resist the state. So I think non-violence is passively there in what I try to do. But I did not use that language to frame this analysis of resistance practices. But yes, since you have said it, I'll try to see how the same material that I have from the field, and as in when I go there, I'll try also to see from this perspective. That's a very new lens. Thank you so much.
And especially, I think this question becomes very pertinent. Thanks, Anu, for asking this, because we are a nation where resistance should be in our veins, and no other person said it very rightly for the country is Mahatma Gandhi and the whole freedom movement, which was a kind of, I will say, a resistance, and which means that our democracy can only thrive in a resisting environment. And time and again, resistance has to become a kind of an accountability check for what government does and what government should not do. Nevertheless, these are, I will say, endless communications. But thank you so much, Rahul, for this insightful presentation and so patiently answering to all the questions. Before I let everyone go, I would also like to thank all the participants here. I see a couple of them also in YouTube. As speakers, as participants, you make these conversations meaningful for us. As individually, I am one of the probably luckiest student on earth at this moment, learning, loving, and living these conversations on water, and so enriching that you can't ask more from water education on this. Next week, we have equally interesting conversation coming, and probably you will be able to link it a little bit more also from today. We have Wednesdays for Water on July 15th, 2026 at 5 p.m. IST for a conversation on flood risk intelligence and climate resilience solutions for urban watershed systems. We'll have two IITians talk about it. So Wednesday format is always like a panel discussion. So do stay tuned, and you can look at all our conversations so far, 450 plus, at www.w4w.in to get more insights, to connect to speakers. Please stay tuned with us. You can always also recommend to us if there are speakers interested, if there are youth who have some wonderful research who wants to present here. We provide this platform as an open access education. We thank you for your support and encouragement to make these water conversations meaningful. We are booked until mid of October, which also tells that we are going to be here and continue this conversation. For W4W, water conversation is a way towards water conservation. Thank you so much, Rahul, once again. And thanks a lot, everyone. Please take care. See you next time. Bye-bye.